It's great to see you again. I mean, I remember, um, Catherine, when you came and did your training at Vertex for our
Hmm.
teachers,
Hmm.
and I had this abiding thought in my head. I couldn't get it out of my head because what it felt like to me was
Hmm.
it was the day after the emperor with no clothes has been deposed. Okay, and all this, the orthodoxies, the faddish orthodoxies are dismissed, and they bring in the practical wisdom, and teach the villagers like what to do next.
Right.
You know,
Okay.
uh,
Right.
and uh, I felt like I was one of the students in a classroom with you as the teacher
Yes.
because you kept looking at me like I was the one that was drifting my attention.
Oh, really? Was
Yeah,
I?
and I was like, oh my god, all eyes on me. I'm gonna go to detention if I don't.
The teacher stink eye.
Yeah, well, that was the funny thing, because I never really felt like you were very. I was scared, right? You can be scary, but you don't have to be. But you don't have to be. You don't want to make the kids cower.
No.
So there's
No. No. Indeed.
so where do you how do you know where that line is?
Um. Yeah. Well, you want to inspire them. There's always going to be a little element of fear because they want to impress you, and they want you to respect them and then to admire them, and they want your approval. So of course there's a little bit of fear because there's like, oh, am I going to get it right? Am I going to be is Miss, we call Miss and Sir, that's how we call our teachers here. Will Miss like my piece of work, etc. And so you want that little sense of excitement that goes through them whenever you walk into the room or you take a piece of work and so on. Um, but obviously, you don't want them terrified of you. I mean, I have to say, I'm not sure kids these days would ever be terrified of anyone, would they? I mean, people often say,
Terrified
"Oh,
of
I'm just."
each other. They're terrified of social disapproval, I think.
Yes, that's true. But of a teacher, I'm not sure. I think it's a bit of a myth these days when people say we're strict. Oh, the kids must be terrified. I can't imagine. I mean, maybe I've only ever worked with inner city kids, so maybe I don't know, but I can't imagine any kid ever really being terrified of his teacher, unless something really bad was going on. Obviously, there are exceptional circumstances, but generally speaking, kids aren't scared of their teachers. You want to inspire them, you want to love them, and you want them to have, yes, that little bit of a frisson that makes them go, oh, Mrs. just walked into the room. I need to get my back a little bit straighter.
You
Wow.
just brought up a really relevant topic that we're having here. You said that everyone addresses the teachers as Mrs. and Miss
Miss, Miss, just Miss and Sir.
Mrs. Okay, and is that just in your school or is that a cultural?
No, no, that's across Britain. Yeah, it's Miss and Sir.
Because we're
I mean, you could also call them Miss Smith, but I could go into the classroom and say, now, what has Sir been teaching you today? Sir is so brilliant, isn't he? I would just say Sir. I don't have to say Mr. Smith.
and how did I get to be as old as I am and not realize that having seen To Sir with Love? I should
That's,
have.
well, it's in the title. The clue is in the
Yes,
title.
and it whew, right over this head. We're having a problem with students asking to be addressed with certain forms, specifically pronouns. In my understanding, in British boarding schools, at least, having read the Harry Potter books and also watched old movies, is using the last name is quite common. Um,
Yes.
to refer to students, and I sort of wish we would do that so that we could bypass entirely this pronoun problem that we're having.
I'm not sure that in the schools nowadays they would use last
No?
names so much. Maybe in sport they would. In your sports classes they might do, yes, but I'm not sure they would do in your maths class, your English class, etc. And certainly not in the majority of schools. That would be both public schools and private schools. You mean like maybe the occasional boarding school, maybe, but even then, I think it's quite old fashioned, the idea of referring to them in their last names, apart from maybe in their sports lessons.
Okay.
Um, but I mean, I'm not sure last names or first names takes away from the pronouns point. I mean, because it's still the case that you need to refer to them as he or she, or or you might talk about the girls or the boys, etc. So that still remains a problem, obviously. Um, and I think the schools here face similar issues as they do in the United States. And I think people just try and respect the child's pronouns wherever they can, I suppose.
So, why do people call you a tyrant? Why do people say that you are a strict the strictest school in Britain? Or I also heard like neo-strict. What?
What's
What?
that?
I
Neo?
saw that on your Wikipedia. Someone said you're neo-strict, which I thought was kind of interesting. Um,
Oh, well, I mean, I never look at my Wikipedia page. In the day, I did look at it now and again, and I used to watch as they would kind of fight over my Wikipedia page. People who hated me would go on and say things, and then people who liked me would go on and change it, and so on. I mean, it was ridiculous. I don't know what neo strict means. We're strict in the sense that kids have to walk in silence in the corridors. If they were to turn around and chat in the corridors, they would get a detention. They can't turn around and chat in lessons, they would get a detention. If they were fiddling too much with their pens or staring out the window too much, they might end up with a detention. In the first instance, they would always get a demerit as a warning and then a detention. Secondly, of course, what it means is that nobody ever talks in the corridor, nobody ever turns around in lessons. So that's the result, which is, of course, what you want. The culture then just becomes one of, well, we're going to lessons, we obviously don't talk. I mean, I often, outside my office here, there's the IT room. And, sometimes the kids come down and there's no teacher there just yet. And sometimes it can be a little while for whatever reason. And I will often find the kids just standing outside the classroom in a line and they're totally silent. There's no teacher around. They just got used to it and they know that's what's expected of them, so they don't talk, which is a lovely thing to see because they are self-regulating, they have self-discipline, and they know how to turn that on when they need to. Which is, of course, what you want for children when they finally leave you at 18. You want them to be somebody who is able to self-regulate and has lots of self-discipline. I mean, self-discipline is the key to everything.
what do you do when no one's watching? That's character, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
and just for context for people today, we didn't do a formal introduction because it's almost like I think no one you don't really need an introduction, but of course you do. Uh,
Yes,
so
you need.
our guest today is Katharine Birbalsingh, who is the headmistress director of the Michaela School in Wembley, the Wembley section of London, which is not a posh area. Um,
No,
so
it's the inner city.
it's the inner city, and your students choose to be there or don't choose to be there. How does it work?
Yeah, it's interesting. So admissions works differently here in Britain in comparison to the United States. So I'm the principal, essentially, just for your American audience. We're not in charge of our intake. So whereas a charter school in America, uh, anyone who you can only get your intake from the kids who have applied separately to your charter school and they are outside of the public system. We are a free school, and free schools are a copy of the charter system, except that we have the same admissions process as all the other public schools. So now the admissions process, I mean, in public schools, from what I understand in the US, you're just sort of sent to a school and that's it. Whereas here, people do have a semblance of choice. Now, I say semblance because often people don't get what they want, but they're able to put down 6 different options for choice for the schools that they could go to, and then they will try. The local council, will try to get you as high up that list as possible for your choices. So that means that we will have maybe a quarter of our kids that have chosen us first, maybe another 20% that have chosen us second, and then third and fourth and fifth. And it means that there are a number of kids who don't really want to be here because obviously, if you've chosen us fourth or fifth, well, you're not really interested in going to the school. You just put something down. So, or even third, I'd say. So we have a combination of kids who do want to be here and kids who started off by not wanting to be here. I think that once they've been here for a little while, they they do want to be here. It is often the case that parents will then put themselves down for a waiting list on another school, and then 6 months down the road, the place comes up, and they say to their child, "Come on now, we're going to go," and the child says, "No, no, 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 I'm quite happy here. I want to stay." So that tends to be what happens.
And anyone can visit your school. Anyone can visit the Michaela School if they put their name down on the list, so that you know
Yeah.
they're coming. And are all the classrooms open, like to the public, like within that
Yeah.
registration?
Yeah, so we say that you can come and have a tour, you can have lunch with the kids. You can even, um, if you're checked DBS, like the whole child criminal stuff, if you've got one of those certificates, you can even spend the afternoon going in and out of lessons on your own, just seeing what's happening. And, often
Hmm.
teachers will do that because they come here to sort of learn what we do. Um, and we have guests every day. So today, an hour ago, I was talking to about 12, 13 people, guests who were here, and answering their questions for 10, 15 minutes after they'd had lunch. So that's what, yeah, the idea is, I suppose, in having the guests is that people get to learn what we do. They can take ideas back to the schools and use them. But also, the kids feel very special. They've got guests coming in and they think, oh, well, this is our school and we're different. And that's why people come to see what we do. And it's really nice for them. It's also great for their soft skills. They can go up and introduce themselves and wherever you come from today. And oh, and what do you do for a job and that kind of thing. And so we help to prepare them in that way so that they can have those conversations with guests who are here.
Yeah, Robert Pondicio, who I'm sure you met, he's the fellow at the Fordham Institute. Very famous former educator and now think tank guy. Publishes widely. He came for a visit, and he was he was won over.
Yeah.
Which he's not. He tends to be a pretty skeptical guy. Like he's not. I would say he's no pushover. So that says a lot. And also your results are very good. Can you talk a little bit
Yeah.
about the results?
Yeah. I mean, we do get great results with the kids. Um, Schools in this country are measured by the amount of progress that they make, and they give you a progress 8 score, which is across 8 subjects how the kids have done. And when they arrive in year 7, so I suppose grade 7 for you, and then when they leave in year 11, grade 11, because we finish at 11, and then they have 2 more years after that of what are called A levels if they want to go on and do that. And they measure that progress over those 5 years. And as all schools are not able to choose their kids, the idea is that it is fair because you've been given your kids by the local council, etc. Anyway, in any case, even that weren't the case, the fact is it's just progress. They're not saying what's the attainment, they're just saying what's your progress. Well, last year we got the highest progress 8 in the country, out of 3,000 secondary schools. So that's pretty good. But it's also the case that we get loads of the top grade 9. There's something like half of the papers that were marked got grade 9s. We got very unusually high scores, given that we're an inner city school. So yeah, I mean, we tell the kids that it's your lottery ticket if you get to come here. You're really very, very lucky. And I think you are, if you get to come here. It will change your life forever, really.
And have you noticed over time, as you've had more success, that you've been picked as number one more from the people that are choosing schools? Are you more of like a draw?
Uh, yes, I think so, but not that much more. It's quite fascinating, actually. I think yes, we are more. There's no question that we are more popular, but not as many as you might imagine. And I think a lot of people think they'd like to go to the school that's right next to them. Um, I think, especially in the inner city, I think a lot of families don't really kind of know necessarily. They don't do the research necessarily. I mean, look, they could come and visit us. They could come and have lunch with the kids and do a tour and so on. A lot of them don't choose to do that. A lot of the families who end up sending their kids here have never visited the school. So that's slightly odd because you sort of think,
Mm.
well, look, you can come, why not? So I think it's much more of a middle class thing to do. to think, right, I've got to go and investigate all these schools. I'm going to take notes and
Mm-hmm.
so on,
Mm-hmm.
compare schools. I think in the inner city, there's much more of an idea of, well, we go to our local school and we'll just send the kids there. As long as it's not that terrible school,
Mm-hmm.
between these schools, I'm kind of happy with any of them. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, you have this great success. To what do you attribute your success?
Well, we are, well, I'd say we're small C conservatives. So I always say I'm a small C conservative and I have small C conservative values. So we believe in personal responsibility, a sense of, sorry, those are our pips. The kids are changing classes. But don't
Oh.
worry, they are silent corridors. So we will not hear all the brah that you would normally hear in a school right now. In fact, all I ever hear right now, I can hear the chairs moving as they're pushing them under their desks. You know, that's all I hear.
Wow.
I don't hear anything else.
I think a
Um,
lot of teachers here in the United States would be just astonished at that kind of expectation.
yeah.
Mm.
Well, a lot of people are astonished by that here in the UK as well. I mean, it is. Sometimes I feel like we're a bit of a safari park. You know, people come and look and say, "Wow, look, there are the hippopotamuses, there are the giraffes." You know, because they're just kind of looking. This is extraordinary. How does this happen? And it is. You know, whenever I go around the school, I always think, "Gosh, this is some kind of miracle." You know. So what were we saying?
To what do you attribute your success? And I guess
Oh yeah.
this connects.
Yeah, so the small C conservative values. So we believe that if you are given a piece of homework, you need to do your homework. And it doesn't matter what happens at home, you need to get it done.
Right.
And people say, yeah, but what about you coming from a difficult background? What happens if, you know, there's a big argument between mom and dad that night? And my position, and it sounds mean, but my position is you've got to find time around that argument to get your homework done. Because life is going to throw all kinds of difficulties at you. And you can't turn up to your boss and say, sorry, I don't have the presentation because something happened to me last night. You need to find a way to get it done. And so we have the same expectations for all children, whatever their backgrounds. And what people don't think in the moment when they're so called being compassionate with that child and letting him off for his homework not done, they feel good about themselves. But ultimately, when that happens with that child over and over and over again, and he falls further and further behind, and eventually he leaves school functionally illiterate and functionally enumerate, well, I can tell you who's miserable. It's him, right? You feel you were this great person who was being super kind, when in fact, in the end, this child, well, isn't able to read and write and add up properly. So I think it's important for us to recognize that holding the line, being strict with kids, is about loving them. It's about loving them enough to keep your standards really high for them. And that's what all of us do in the school. So the other thing that makes us really powerful is our consistency. The stuff I'm telling you, all of my teachers would say to you. They wouldn't say differently. And it doesn't mean we don't have our own personalities. Of course we do, and our own quirky ways of doing things, but we all share very similar ideas of what works for children and how we should behave around children.
It's funny. You reminded me of a friend of mine who he has three kids from former marriage, and he's married with his college girlfriend, and she has their own three kids. And when they got together, it was a small house, and there was chaos everywhere, and there were toys everywhere. And he just said, every Saturday morning, I'm going to come through the house, and any toys that are out, I'm going to put in a bag, and I'm going to throw them away. I'm going to put them in the dumpster.
Right,
And Saturday came along and there was toys everywhere, and he went to the
right.
house, and they were screaming and crying, and he put the toys in the bag, and then he took it out to the he took it out in the car and drove it to the dump, and he came back, and there was drama and there was hysterics. But the next Saturday there were no
There was
there
nothing
was
left.
nothing left there, and so it
Exactly.
doesn't, it feels terrible. I think
Yeah,
if you're wrenching your whole philosophy,
yeah.
um, and there may be some drama initially, but then the expectation is set, and then because you are the adult, right? And part of letting kids be kids, you can't do that unless the adults are the adults, and
That's right.
and set those boundaries. And I think, and so that means that you actually, because so often I've been in schools, I taught in schools where they have these rules, but they just don't enforce them, or they enforce them intermittently, which is almost worse than never. You know,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. I always say, if you don't, for instance, you guys don't wear uniforms. So we all wear uniforms in the UK. And it means the kid will wear a blazer and a pair of trousers and a white shirt and a tie. And this is kind of standard. And that's fine. And if you have a uniform, you need to enforce the uniform. You can't say we've got a uniform, but then when kids don't turn up with their blazers, you say it's all right. Or they wear different trousers and you say, oh, it's all right. Oh, I don't have my tie. Oh, it doesn't matter. Or your tie is down to here. Oh, it doesn't matter. Like all of this matters. Now, you can scrap the uniform, and that's fine. But what you can't do is what you just said, Paul, which is that you have a rule, and sometimes you enforce it, and sometimes you don't. Or worse, as you say, you enforce it for the good kids because you're not going to get any pushback from them, but for the bad kids, you leave it alone. And then you say, well, those naughty kids, they come from difficult homes, or it's not their fault for whatever reason. If you have a rule, you need to enforce it for everyone always. The one thing that I can tell you, I never, ever hear our kids say is, it's not fair. I literally, in 8 years, have never heard them say that. They just don't say it because the rules are applied consistently to everybody all of the time, and they know it. So they never say, yeah, but he got this. Yeah, but why did she get a lot? Never happens. Never happens. And that's important because it also gains their trust. They know that everything's fair. Kids really care about things being fair. They really care.
So, Catherine, have you taught in other environments? Have you been a school leader in other climates? I mean, how did you come to this conviction and to this place?
Yeah, well, the thing is, I've always taught in the inner city. So I don't know what it's like to teach in, say, a private school and so on. Although I have to say, my inclination is that, kids are kids, right? It doesn't matter whether they're rich or poor or black or white. It doesn't matter. They're all the same. And we have this idea that it's also different depending on the cohort and so on. Look, kids go to school to learn, and then they're going to push back. And we, if we're doing our jobs as adults, will push back against that. And then they'll feel the pushback. And it's like your friend with his toys. The kids felt the pushback. And guess what? He won that battle because the next week there were no toys out. That's how you have to treat everything. And the thing is, they're clever. So I always feel like it's a bit of a game. They make a move, we make a move. They make a move, we make a move. And, we give out some homework and they find some way around it. I'm like, damn, they got us on that one. Right, we're going to do this instead. And it's just a cat and mouse game, isn't it? And it's fun. And sometimes they really impress you with things they get away with. And I think, how did they get us on this one?
Well, and don't you think that they're impressed too when you catch them and that they
Yeah.
admire it? Yeah. Well done.
Well, it's funny because when our year 11s leave, so we have a prom and all of that, and then they tell us the things that they got away with, and they love it. They absolutely love sitting down and saying, "Wow, you didn't know," but blah 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 blah. So this last leaving year 11 now that have just gone now, they told us. So we have these mirrors in the corridors that the staff are meant to use to look at to see whether the kids are coming up. And anyway, they said how the mirrors are so great for them because they can see the teachers in the mirrors. So I've now gone to the staff and said, all right, guys, look, year 11 have just said, this is how they're using the mirrors. Are any of you actually using the mirrors? So one teacher came back to me with, well, I use this one mirror, and there's about 8 mirrors in the staircase. He said, I use this one mirror and that's it. And I thought, oh my goodness, all this time, the mirrors are there and they're helping the kids. They're not helping the teacher. So this summer, I'm going to get all those mirrors taken out. So, that's what I mean. It's a game, right? Which is great fun. And, the year 11s, I'm sure their younger brothers and sisters will be cursing them for having told us the secret about the mirrors.
Yeah, it's fascinating because it's one thing to have this culture where these expectations are set in the school, and so anyone coming in kind of sees what's going on. And I imagine that a lot of once you create the culture, it's some degree self-sustaining, right? But I wonder, do kids who are new to the school, do they have a tough time adjusting at first? How do you handle that?
Yeah, I mean, look, if it's a single kid coming in the middle of the year, we do a morning with them where we explain all the rules and we explain what needs to happen. They quickly adapt. They're all right. In year 7, when they join us for the first time from the local elementary schools, they spend 7 days with us following what we call a behavior boot camp, where we teach them how to behave in a Michaela way.
Wow.
And we don't do any subjects during that week. It's all lessons on how to behave like Michaela. So, we look at Nelson Mandela and we look at how he spent 27 years in prison, and then we say, you've got a 30-minute detention, so you can suck it up. It's no big deal. He spent 27 years. You've got 30 minutes. And so
Mm.
that's the kind of thing that we do, and they get it. They get that you take the detention, and in return you get this amazing education. um, and so they understand that, and the detention is also helping to teach them how to be better people. So um, we try and get the kids to buy into what we're about, because what you can't be are bouncers. We've got 700 kids here, 60 odd staff. There's no way that we're all going to be on top of them all of the time. They need to buy into what we do, the majority. You'll always have your 10 or 15% who are kept in line by those detentions. But the majority need to do it because they believe in it. So that's what, and they get a really great education, because they have great behavior, no calling out and silliness in the lessons. Everybody's focused, and there are great explanations, great teaching going on. So, I mean, that's the kind of thing that I was speaking about at Vertex with you, Paul. I mean,
Hmm.
I'd be interested to know, when you say the Emperor's New Clothes came off, I mean, what were the things that you found most interesting about what I was saying?
Definitely, um, drill, baby, drill, right? Because that's that kind of. I guess the nice way to say it is structured practice.
Yes.
But I mean, when you say we're going to do this 6, 7, 8 times
Mm,
until the kids are convinced and have the confidence that
yes.
they can do it, and you have to be
Yes.
always be oriented towards what they're like, what you're getting back from them, like,
Exactly.
and
Mm.
um,
Yeah.
I thought that was very interesting, and also just your the whole approach of like all eyes on me, like because kids are kids, they're gonna drift, they're gonna play with their hair, they're gonna look out the window, all those things you were saying, and every teacher knows that. But unfortunately, we have this philosophy, which is that somehow that's the source of creativity and inspiration, is this sort of amorphous meandering. So having so having a teacher centered classroom
That's it.
is wrenching, very wrenching. And I was actually curious how the other teachers in the room were taking it, because I was checking with
Yeah.
them and watching their faces, and I'd say like seemed to, I don't know what you thought, but seemed like 70-75% were into it.
Yeah,
Um,
well, a woman there, she was in her 50s. And so she's been doing this a long time. And she came up to me and she said, what you said was amazing. You know, you always imagine that you need to pull it out of them. That's what they always say. And
mhm,
the idea of putting it into them, she was just kind of saying, this is mind blowing. And she's spent her whole career doing it the way that she's been doing it. And I was saying, well, try it. Try and do what I'm suggesting and see what you get. But you do have to keep checking in with them. You don't want to just talk at them,
mhm,
you know?
mhm,
You need to think, I want them to learn this, and then tell them it. And then, as we said, you can drill it. You can get them to do a bit of pair work. You can do a class discussion on it. You need to make sure that they really have got it before you then say, okay, now I want you to do this exercise. And the exercise that you've given them has to relate totally to what you've just been talking about, so it connects to that.
mhm,
And then when you set them off on task, they need to be really clear. What are we meant to do with this task? Have we got all the knowledge in our heads right now to be able to be successful with this task? Because if you haven't given them that knowledge, then they're not going to feel successful, and then they're going to hate you for it. You want to build them up so that they then think, look, I'm doing all this work. Look how clever I am. Oh, wow, I love this lesson. And the next time they come back in, they're more likely to listen to you because they know, oh,
mhm,
you're going to tell me what I need to know for what's on the paper. If,
mhm,
on the other hand, we're teaching them in such a way that you're I always think that the progressive way is sort of this mind game that you're playing. I've got something in my head. You don't know what it is. So you're going to try and guess now what it is I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Like, why don't you just tell them? It would take 2 seconds, then they know. And you can tell them a series of things. And then you can say what you want them to do with those things on the piece of paper.
This
And then they can go ahead and do it, and then they feel really successful.
this all sounds so logical and common sense to me, but I'm wondering, how much are you swimming against the tide, and why is that? Why do I have the sense that very few other educators look at things this way. So how isolated is this philosophy, would you say, and why is it so isolated?
Yeah, well, E.D. Hirsch, who of course belongs to you, he writes about knowledge being central and being important. Dan Willingham, of course, again belongs to you. talks about the cognitive science and how children learn. And so everything I'm saying fits with what they say. And frankly, I've read those books and so on, and I've got many of our ideas from them. So you all have it there in the US. I mean, we don't have it. I mean, you guys are the ones, the authors writing about this stuff.
Mhm.
Um, and they're fantastic. And when you see it happen, so like we do it at school, and when you talk to the kids about their knowledge of subjects, it was so interesting. At the guests I was talking to earlier today, one of them said she's a history teacher, and she said these kids were talking to her. They're doing geography instead of history now as their optional subject, moving towards their exams. And she said, but they know so much history, and they really like history. So why are they not doing history? And I said, well, you just don't know how much geography they know. That's all. The fact is, they were better at geography, but the subject that they didn't choose, she was so impressed that they knew so much in, because of course our teaching is such, and our homework and our revision and everything that we do is such that the kids really know their stuff. I mean, they really know it. So, and they don't know it just for an exam. They know it in a way that they'll keep it for the rest of their lives. I mean, one of my teachers, one of my senior teachers, he was telling me that he lives in this town called Berkhamsted, which is just outside of London, and there's a castle there. And when the year 11s were leaving, these same year 11s, one of them said to him, "Oh, you live in Berkhamsted, sir?" And he said, "Yeah." And they said, "Well, oh, yeah, there's a castle there." And then this kid started reeling off all these facts about this castle that in his town. And then he turned to his friend and he said, what year was it built again? And the kid said, "Oh, I think it was around blah, blah." And they were just having this conversation about this castle in his town. And he said, "Catherine, the thing is, I have visited that castle. I've read the little plaques everywhere. I read the pamphlet they gave me. And I cannot repeat to you right now what our boys were saying about the castle because I don't know it well enough to be able to repeat it to you." And the thing is, they weren't being tested on this castle. They've just learned it at school and they remember it. And so it's the kind of thing where they'll be at a dinner party and they'll just be able to make reference to all kinds of things all of the time because it's just part of their knowledge base, which is a wonderful thing, really.
Okay, so I agree, but I mean, you have these people that are saying, well, if you teach things by rote or you teach
Yeah.
things, there's no transfer, they can't apply that, they can't abstract, they can't pick up new things later. Or I get this a lot in math. Like if I taught the way that you are suggesting in math, there's this idea that well, they would just only know how to handle these types of problems, and they wouldn't know how to handle something they hadn't seen before. So what do how do you answer that?
Well, it's just not true. That's the thing. It's just not true. They just haven't ever done it our way before, so they just don't realize. I mean, the thing is, we've got the best maths department in the whole country, right? And in 2019, and then those results, and then we had COVID, and last year we got the best results in the whole country. So, like, the fact is, my maths department is my strongest department, and they look, I mean, okay, look, we all understand, I think, and we would all agree on that we have to learn our times tables by rote, right? We all get that.
I
Well,
I agree, of course, but I've
but
had arguments. Believe it or
even so,
not,
How
I have
else
had
can
arguments
you
about
learn
that.
it? What other method is there?
Well, there are two things, right? So
yeah,
there are people that will say, oh, we shouldn't really, really need to teach the timetables in the early grades because there will be technology will do that for you. Okay, I know, but and then the other thing is, well, they should understand conceptually how it works so that they can do it as it's as necessary. Now, you and I know what you've got working memory, you've got long term memory. You just can't handle that kind of cognitive load. Um, you need to automatize things, right? So, I mean, but that's I will get that. I have had that argument with people, and I feel like I have a hole in my head because I don't even know where you know how you can teach people to have common sense.
yeah. I mean, the thing
But
is,
I didn't want to interrupt you if you were using that as a jumping off point.
yeah, well, I was saying about the times tables and saying, look, if I have um, a problem that I need to solve, go into the shop. There are, four sweets, each cost 8 cents. How much do I have to pay for it? uh, if I'm having to sit there and really think about what is 8 times 4 to try and work it out, you know, what I need to be able to go is, oh yeah, 8 times 4, 32. Right, I need 32 cents. Boom. And especially if the problem gets more complicated. And then one sweet falls on the ground, and then, somebody grabs some of your sweets, but then you grab another 5 sweets or whatever it is. The problem gets more complicated. You need to, at each stage, be able to go, bam, 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 in order to be able to complete that problem. It makes you more adept by having that knowledge at your fingertips to be able to come out with it. It's sort of like me being able to answer your questions now. If every time, so I know my school inside out and I know education inside out. If you were to ask me, oh, why is your school strict? What is it that makes it strict? And I went, let me think. And it took me ages to answer that question. Well, you'd be long gone. We wouldn't be able to have a podcast. And not only that, but I wouldn't be able to think carefully. So the mirrors point, I hear from the kids, oh, wait, they're using the mirrors. Let me go to my staff. They're not using the mirrors. Right. I need to take the mirrors out. That's going to happen in the summer. I need to be able to make those decisions quickly. I need to understand and have this stuff at my fingertips. If I'm taking a long time to make these decisions, I'm going to run a really bad school. So now the only way you become this stuff is at your fingertips is if you're very, very familiar with it. And the way in which you become familiar with certain things is you drill them. So times tables is a very basic maths fact that you need to drill. Now, I recognize that when you're learning about Macbeth, you're not drilling the whole of Macbeth. You might drill some quotations, but you're not drilling the story. That would be crazy. Obviously, you're reading it, you're talking about it. It's a different thing. Having said that, as I say, you might drill quotations. You might drill historical dates in history. You might drill French verbs when learning French, But, how do you make a French sentence? You need to drill some vocabulary. You need to drill some grammar. And then you need to apply the stuff that's been drilled so that you can create a sentence. That's what you do. In the same way as the times tables that have been drilled, you're applying that stuff that's been drilled to a question. The application is the thing that's important that helps you to learn it. It's not, but if you haven't learned the stuff, when I say helps you to learn it, helps you to think through a problem. But you need to have the tools to be able to think through the problem. Otherwise, you're just never going to get there. So they are letting those kids down when they don't drill them in stuff, because the kids literally have no tools to be able to figure out a problem, or to be able to put a sentence together in French, or be able to take Macbeth apart. Look, we all had the alphabet drilled into us at some point. We all learned how to read. If we didn't know how to read, we wouldn't be able to do English.
Well, that's a battle we're having here too, or the reading wars. Paul and I work with a lot of teachers who I think agree with you, and I'm sure we agree with everything you're saying. What advice would you have for teachers who are in schools?
Yeah,
with
I know.
Yeah, with different goals. What advice can you give them?
Well, my feeling is always, look, management never come in. They just don't. They say they're going to visit your classroom. They don't actually ever visit your classroom, do they? So don't use management as an excuse of, I'd love to do that, but management are going to come and see me. Nobody's coming to see you. So do what you want, and do it really well. That's what I always did. And then when my principal or whoever would see what I was doing, he'd think, this is different, but it seems to be working. So I'll just leave her alone. Because a principal wants an easy life. He doesn't want to have, if you don't have any behavior problems and the kids are all learning loads and they're going to get great results, no principal's going to stop that from happening. You just need to get it happening in the first instance. So nobody's coming to watch you. Put your desks in rows, right? Have them in rows. Have the kids all looking at you. Start off with your rules. Make it clear what your rules are and what you expect of them and how this is going to be great. You need to inspire them. You do this for me. You're going to see how much you're going to learn. I can't wait to be teaching you X, Y, and Z. And then make sure your explanations are clear. Make sure you're always checking for understanding with them. Somebody tell me what I've just said. Somebody explain to the class what I've just said. Right. So what is it that we're about to get on with? Somebody tell me which page. Somebody tell me which number. Right. And what is it we're going to do with it? Right. Everybody, once everybody's clear, you then set them off on certain exercises. but you also before that have had a class discussion, so they've really understood it. And then at the end of the lesson, you can check and see. So can somebody now tell me, now that we've just done this lesson, and you're all so brilliant, oh my goodness, you're so clever. So tell me, what's this? What's that? What's that? What's that? And they go, oh, 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 and they're so happy. And you say, wow, that's a merit for you, or point for you, or whatever it is your point system is. And then off they go, skipping down the hole. Next day they come back. You say, let me just recap. I want to make sure we remember what we did yesterday. So, well, who can remember this? Who can remember that? Oh, we've forgotten. Let me just explain again. Da, 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 da. Okay, let's do it again. Bum, bum, bum. Fantastic. We're really there. Okay, so today we can take it a little bit further. And we're going to do this. And this is what we're doing. And you explain it to them. You explain. You check for understanding again. Give them the exercise. They get on with it. You maybe do a bit of a discussion. At the end, sorry, this is our kids again moving. And you check for understanding. And then you know, at the end, you check to see whether they got it. I mean, and you just keep doing more and more of that. We always have a quiz every week that tests them on the last week's stuff. It can be a 10-minute, 15-minute thing. 10 questions, quick, on a piece of paper. You give them all a blank piece of paper. All right, question number 1. Boom. Question number 2. Boom. And you're just checking there because you can take those quizzes in and then look and see, okay, have we all got it? Oh, look, number 5. Nobody's got number 5. Something's gone wrong there. I need to reteach it, you know? And as long as you're doing that regularly, we also have exams in January and then in July or June. We just had our set of exams just now, and the kids were working so hard towards them, and we're crunching all the numbers now. So there's 2 big assessments in the year, and then there's these mini quizzes that happen every week, which keeps them on their toes and keeps them wanting to learn. As long as they know what to learn, as long as they know what's coming up, don't try and trick them, okay? Tell them the answer. That's my number 1 piece of advice.
So yeah, that's right. Of course, that was the biggie, right? Tell them, just tell them. And when you say just tell them,
yes,
go into it a little bit because I think teachers would love to hear that.
Okay. So if I say to you right now, you know, what time do you think school finishes here at Michaela? Well, Paul, you may guess 3 o'clock. Bonnie, you might guess 3:30. You know, any number of people in the class may guess any number of different things because you have no idea that school actually finishes at 3:15. So that's why it is now 3:17 here, which is why I'm hearing all these chairs moving and they're all going to be heading outside. Now, you don't know. So it would have been much easier for me to just say, guess what? Michaela ends at 3:15. And that took me about 30 seconds. I could have spent 10 minutes saying, nearly there. Paul would have said, 3:70? Nearly. And Bonnie would have said, 3:16. Oh, we're getting close. We could have done that. But I decided not to waste 10 minutes and just tell you, finishes at 3:15. And then we're going to talk about a few more things. And then 5 minutes later, I'll say, what time, Paul, does school finish? And you'll go, 3:15. And I'll say, well done, Paul. Bonnie, remind me, what did Paul just say? 3:15. Bam, we've got it, class. That is what teaching should be, okay? Where you are telling them, and then you're checking to see if they've remembered it. Now, it may be, doesn't mean that you're only just teaching them facts and they're memorizing. It may be that, now, my 3:15 example isn't great, but you teach them one thing and then another thing, and then you expect them to fuse those 2 pieces of information together. That's also good. You can do that. But they have to have the 2 pieces of information first before they confuse them, right? Mm-hmm. So you're not taking anything out of them there. You're giving it to them, and then you're expecting them to do something with it, right? But you do not assume that the knowledge is inside them, and you're going to take it out. Because the main point here is, if you didn't put the knowledge in them, and they know it, that means somebody else did, okay? So it's not just coming from nowhere. If you didn't put it there, their mom or their dad or their uncle put it there because they were talking about some history documentary that they were watching that evening, or they were doing some extra tutoring in maths or whatever it is, somebody else put it there. And the problem with doing it that way is that it always advantages the richer kids, because the richer kids are more likely to access knowledge outside of the classroom. The poor kids, however, depend entirely on us to be able to give them the knowledge that they need to be able to succeed in life. So don't waste your time. You don't have time to waste. You need to catch up these kids who are from poor backgrounds. So spend every minute giving them the answers, right? So that they can then manipulate the knowledge and do stuff with it and become really good at whatever it is you want them to become good at, you know?
Well,
I,
speaking of giving them things, I love your I've heard you speak about patriotism, appropriate levels of patriotism, and I
yes,
think that's a gift as well, and that's something we're struggling with very much here in the States. People seem to think that the goal of education is to critique our society or to remake our society, and it creates this disillusionment and discouragement, for their home country.
yes. Um, that's absolutely true. I always say that which you love, you can be super critical of, you know. So I've been hugely critical of the education system here in Britain, but I do very much love my country. And you want children to love their country and to feel like they are British. I think this is something that's often denied to ethnic minorities. The idea is that you're actually from somewhere else. Now, you guys, it's less so in America because you do have a real sense of, black people are just American. Whereas here, their origins may be from Ghana or Nigeria or Jamaica and so on. And while Britain, there have been black people here for many years, but there were, like centuries. But there was a very small group of them. The majority of them have come in the 20th century and mainly in the 1950s and 60s.
Hmm.
So then there is a sense of, well, actually, you're from Jamaica. Well, no, you're not. Like my mom is from Jamaica, my father's from Guyana, but I'm British. Like the fact is that we need to we have one umbrella to live under, right? And we have this multicultural community, multi-faith, multi-languages, all kinds of things. That's great. But the one thing we all have in common is being British together. So it's the same with the American situation. You're all American. Now, I have to say, Americans are much better at recognizing this. Your presidents will say, God save America and all this kind of thing at the end of your speeches and that kind of thing, or God bless America. We would never say that. It would never happen here. And there's a sort of unease around singing God Save the King. We definitely sing it because we are British and we want all the children to feel like they're part of that one big British family.
Bonnie, we were talking earlier, and you mentioned the second verse of that
Yeah,
song and
I
how interesting it is given our current predicament.
I really admire a lot of the British patriotic songs. I think you have really better songs than we do. We were actually laughing a little bit before about "At Hail to the Chief," uh, but the second verse of "God Save the Queen." Now I'm going to have to find it. Deals with politics, right, and confound their politics and frustrate their knavish tricks. And I just love that because do you know that verse by heart?
Yeah, I don't actually. But yes, go on.
Confound it's
Tell me more.
scatter our enemies, confound their politics, frustrate their knavish tricks.
Right.
And there's so much politics now in education, and I think what I was saying to Paul is that I don't mind that people have different politics than me at all, but what I really can't stand are knavish tricks. And
Yes, I can see
this
why we've left that out of given the because we have a verse that we use as a second verse. I remember at the time when we were deciding this at the beginning, thinking, no, we can't use that second verse. We're going to use the third or the fourth instead as the second verse. And now when you say that, I think, oh yeah, now I remember why we
well,
didn't.
why can't you use it? I think it's great.
Well, it's perhaps a little bit too, get the enemy kind of thing.
It's
Uh,
not as bad as the French one, the French anthem,
yes,
but
with
yeah.
blood. Yes, yes, yes. No, indeed,
Well,
indeed.
they say that about the American national anthem too. It's basically a war, kind of a
Yes,
glorious war song. But we're dealing with teachers who are deceitful towards parents, and
yes.
I can't think of any more knavish trick than that. And there's so much broken trust between school and home, and we're even dealing with situations now where teachers are being required to be deceitful to parents regarding gender transitioning and things like that. So this is a whole new realm that I've not seen in my lifetime that is concerning.
Yeah. Yes, well, I mean, I do feel really sorry for teachers
Mhm.
because it's so difficult nowadays. It's just so difficult. And people on the outside who are not teachers have absolutely no idea what a difficult job it is.
Mhm.
It was always difficult, but now it's even more difficult.
Yeah.
And they're sort of left to charter these unknown waters, which how they get into trouble for the slight, for anything, stepping out of line, and they don't know what to do. And there isn't really any guidance. It's very, very difficult, and that's just culturally. But then it's just also difficult getting kids to learn these days, because of the smartphones, the iPads, the video games. The kids are so distracted, and their brains turn to mush because they're not able to. They're not brought up reading, for instance, because a book cannot compete with the phone and all the colors and the pop-ups and the explosions, and a book is black and white and flat. So it's very hard. And I do think, once upon a time, a village really brought up the child. The parents understood. The teacher says you misbehaved, then you misbehaved, and we're going to punish you at home as well. That no longer is the case. Far too often, teachers are just left, to hang out. They're hung out to dry. So I do feel for them. Not only that, but all the things that I'm saying about how to teach well. Well, we're all told to do the exact opposite. Is what you said about the Emperor's New Clothes Ball. Like, so you're told to teach in ways that don't work, and then you have to spend the next 10 to 12 years figuring out what works. Like, it's just crazy, honestly. I mean, our
Well,
schools could be so much better.
I mean, thinking about the knavish tricks. I mean, the biggest knavish trick of all is the ed schools, right? At least in this country, the degree programs and what they're pushing in those things, and
Oh,
how 95% of it is
yes,
trash. I would say, half of that is benign trash and the rest is
yes,
dangerous trash. And so how
yes,
do when you have your example of the 315 thing, just taking, I can tell you exactly how a teacher trained that way would do it here. And what they would do is they would say, well, okay, what matters isn't so much when the truth of when the school ends. What matters is that we all share our ideas of what it is. We all make little post-its and we put it up on a whiteboard, and then we all have this sort of community organizing experience where we all reach a consensus around, what we think it is. It's totally politically devious because the point is to transform society. So they're trying to make little collectives. Okay. And the collective truth
learn it.
is what matters. And this is, communism basically. And like, I don't know how else to call it.
How is
Uh,
it you learn anything? The thing is that you all don't have national exams that are holding you to account. You see,
mm,
we have them. We have to meet the standards of those national exams, otherwise we're shamed, as a
mhm.
school. So you all
Well,
don't have that.
We
Well,
have,
let me put this. Maybe I'm a little too harsh. We wouldn't do that, say, for a fact like 315, but we would do that for something like an interpretation of history that maybe they don't even know the facts about
Oh,
anyway, right? But so that
yes,
when they
we
do
would do
that
that.
with an interpretation, but it's still the idea of making an argument and backing up your position, and you can be
Yes,
wrong, and that's
yes,
okay to be wrong because people are
yes,
wrong, and this is right. Like
yes,
we've lost that, that essentially the search for truth, and in its place, we put this sort of collective sense
yes,
of consensus, which
yes.
I find is kind of at the core of the
the,
political.
the search for truth, and then also just the search for the correct answer. Like, yeah, we've actually had a whole discussion in this country about whether two and two can equal five. We do have this thing called the SAT and the ACT. There's a big
Yes, you did. You
anti-test.
don't anymore. I mean, what I mean is the SAT doesn't really count anymore. Am I right in thinking that?
There's a big anti-test movement right now, because I think, like listening to you talk about your wonderful results, but I take hope in that teachers who are not doing good jobs will be exposed by their terrible results. But the anti-test movement is one way to hide the terrible results so that the bad practices can continue. So
So the SATs, they still happen. It's just that they don't count.
Yeah, a lot of the teachers, I mean, sorry, a lot of the schools, the higher ed schools, I mean, the colleges are discounting them or they don't require them anymore. So they're looking at other factors like grades, although grades
The
are all over the
grades,
place depending on the school. And so the
depending on
grades don't really mean much and there's grade inflation. So it's just a way of eliminating standards.
it's the cat and mouse
Um,
game you were describing with the kids, but between the schools and the colleges, and
But how are they? I don't understand. How do they choose kids then? I mean, they can't look at the grades. They can't look at the SATs. So are they just looking at the essays they've written in order to
well,
in
I
the
think they do look at the grades, but they have like a weighting system for how
it's a
difficult the
holistic
school
method,
is.
Catherine. It's
Yeah, I know.
it's a
Yeah,
magical
it's a,
box.
it's just like it's very fudgy. So I think that
right.
the push for equity and the push for
No
essentially
one's
ethnic
supposed to
representation,
hear.
frankly, has forced this on them. or they force it on themselves, however you want to look at it.
I mean, I did student interviews for Harvard, and yeah, there's like five criteria. Grades are one of them, test scores are one of them, and then there's just this magical. And this is where they were dinging Asians, was on the personal traits, and just saying, and that's completely arbitrary. This kid has that special zip, that zing that we're looking for here. So yeah, it's holistic admissions.
But really, like at every stage of the way, they're looking at race. Let's be honest. Like they're looking at the race of the applicant. They're looking at exactly like they're trying to hit. They are
But
trying to hit a
they
number.
can't anymore. We
And
just have.
all right, we just had this judgment, but up until this judgment, they've been doing that. Um, and so they're
Yeah.
either going to find some way to finagle it and go around it with the essay, because the judgment that the Supreme Court released said that um, left a little bit of wriggle room around using the essay. If race has been a determining factor that has built character in your life in some way, well, then you can express that in the essay as an individual, like overcoming obstacle thing. Even though the court is explicit that that itself cannot be exploited to achieve the same ends on a
But you
collective
don't
way.
have I mean,
But
have
that's very hard to
class
prove.
as sort of the same kind of issues around class, I presume, in the UK.
Yes. So when Oxford and Cambridge are choosing kids, they will look at their postcode. Um, they will look at whether or not someone has been to university in the family before.
Mhm.
They will look at race as well. They will look at, I mean, those are the big ones. The two big ones is the postcode, and they'll also look at the school, actually. So the school is a big thing. If your school gets good results, then in a way that'll count against you
Mm.
because it means that you are in a decent school. If you're in a school that's in total chaos and you're doing well, then that will count in your favor. So that also matters. Um, and yeah, I mean, I don't, I imagine that it changes the intake in terms of how good they are at the subject that they're wanting to study, which isn't to say that perhaps that child, when they were five, might not have been just, brilliant later on at 18. But the thing is that if you've been to terrible schools all your life, the problem is that knowledge matters. So people think, oh, you have potential. Yeah, but if you have never been taught properly for most of your life, there at 18, it's almost impossible to be able to make that up. Now, there are exceptional kids who will be able to, but for most kids, you've got to get it right. I feel at 11, we get them at 11, and we can do a lot of damage control then. But even then, there are lots of kids, in the bottom set, for instance, and I look at them and I think, I wonder what you would have been like had you been through a Michaela school all the way from when you were 5 years old. How different would it have been for you?
And
Um, yeah,
Yeah,
go
and,
on.
that also connects to something earlier you said in the pedagogy is you were advising our teachers at Vertex to always judge your worth as a teacher by the five lowest performing children
Yes,
in the class.
yes,
And that really blew my mind. I was just kind of said, well, of course, because the other kids are going to be fine, right? Who really needs you in that room? Who needs
mm,
you the most? And so I think that's so crucial, and it keeps teachers from getting lazy. To be honest, I think.
yes. Indeed, you want to judge yourself by those worst five kids because your level of professionalism matters to you. And if you're judging yourself by the five best, well, anybody can get the five best kids to learn stuff because they'll learn stuff from anyone. You could be upside down and they'd learn from you. It wouldn't matter. It's the five worst kids that are that are really the judge of whether or not you're any good. So, yeah, it is good to think like that because it means that you'll keep your standards high and you'll work really hard for the kids. And you won't allow those five to drift off. As soon as you allow those five to drift off, you lose half the class.
I'm still weirding out on this zip code idea because I'm guessing that the kids in your school maybe come from desirable zip codes in terms of university admissions. Is that correct?
Yeah. So the kids from our school, they've got the advantage of being in the kinds of postcodes that you know would be considered disadvantaged.
Advantage of
Uh,
disadvantage. That's, yeah,
yeah, so that counts for them.
yeah.
Some of them, a number of them might not have a parent who's been to university, so that will count for them. The school, however, does very well. So in terms of results, so that might not count, for them. It would count against them, but it's not the same as being at a private school. So it's not. We're kind of somewhere in between. It's not the worst school, but it's not the best school because private schools would be considered to be a serious
Well,
advantage.
what would you think about just straight meritocracy for college admissions? Because these seem like pretty incredible contortions that we're going to.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I get why they're doing it. What they're saying is if we just do straight meritocracy, the top university, Oxford and Cambridge, would be filled with a whole load of private school kids, and uh, you'll get some public school kids, but there'll be a lot more private school kids, and that they feel is unfair because there were bright kids, let's say in the inner city, who haven't been to Michaela, who, if they'd been somewhere else, would have got higher marks. And there's no question that's true.
Mm,
The problem, however, with saying, oh, well, let's let them in anyway, is one, what are you judging them by? So if
mm,
you're looking for potential, how do you judge that potential? If you
right.
want to know if they're going to be a great mathematician and they don't know much math, well, how do you know they're going to be a great mathematician one day? So that's the difficulty there. And as well, excuse me, it means that the kids know. I mean, what I mean is they know that they don't have to reach the same standards as somebody else. And it means they're not really pushing themselves. So it's like what I said about the detentions. You've got to give detentions to anyone who doesn't do their homework and not say, well, it's okay for you because you come from a difficult family, because then that kid is never going to bring his homework in and he's going to be at a disadvantage for the rest of his life. So, what worries me about not having straight meritocracy is that you're actually disadvantaging these kids. You think you're giving them an advantage because you're getting them in. But what happens to them after that? Life doesn't
I
stop.
don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole, but now I'm just pondering, is there no cottage industry yet that's sprung up of selling, zip code addresses to kids from posh neighborhoods who want to improve their chances? Because that's how it cynically would happen here.
Bonnie,
But
you're always looking for an angle. I like
I'm
that.
not looking for the angle. I'm looking. I'm like it's the cat and the mouse.
Right,
It's
right. You got. You're like a
Christmas.
gray hat hacker. You're trying to find the exploits.
Yeah,
That's good.
well, it's only more recently that started, and so maybe in 5, 6 years that will start happening. Yeah,
Hmm.
I mean, who knows? At the moment, what happens is that lots of kids from private schools do not get into Oxford and Cambridge, so actually they go over to the States and they go to Harvard and Yale and Princeton and so on, and that is what the private schools push. We'll get your kids into the Ivy League, and the kids just go to America, and because they're happy with going to American schools, there there isn't so much pushback here on the whole
Hmm.
affirmative action type, but according to class situation that we've got.
Mhm.
I, my main worry is for the country. If your top institutions are not getting your top brains, then
Right.
what are you then going to end up with the cure for cancer? In the end, the country suffers.
Yeah.
And look, I mean, the thing is, it's outrageous that that poor kid who could have been a brilliant mathematician has not been taught math all his life. But then we need to fix the school system so that he can get educated, so that he can compete, as opposed to saying, you know what, we're not going to educate you. We'll just fix the result at the end, so you end up at the place that you would have got had you been educated. But
Yeah,
so what
and
is
to that end, are you gonna open more schools? Do you have others in the works?
Well, we have tried. We tried to open an elementary school. This is over 8 years. We tried to open a secondary school. We tried to set up a leadership course for people, for teachers, other principals, and so on. And we've been blocked at every stage. Every time we've tried to do anything, we've been stopped. So in the end, you sort of give up because you think, well, obviously, they don't want us to expand. They don't want us to, like everybody's stopping us. So then, and plus, I have to fight to keep us, above ground, really, because there are lots of people who would like to see us close. So it's
Who are these people? Why?
um Who are these people? It's a good question. People, a small vocal minority, I would say, of people who just hate what we do. I suppose we show up other schools. We they make up stories about us, about, ill treating kids with special needs, because obviously special needs kids could not possibly keep up with what we do. And we say, no, actually, if you have really great discipline and if you have really great teaching, you'd be amazed at what special needs kids can do. If you get your explanations right, if you tell them the answer, you'd be amazed. But the thing is, they don't want to try out these methods. So when we first opened, gosh, we had people protesting outside. Plus, we're a free school. You all have had charter schools for 30 years. We've only had them for the last 13 years or so.
Hmm.
So it's new. There's less pushback these days. But when we try and expand, that's where we get the pushback. Those are the civil servants in government, who are sort of in charge, and they just don't. It's very difficult to get past them all.
Yeah, I mean, sounds very similar to what Vertex went through. They got sued by the teachers union
Right.
for trying to,
Yeah.
use an existing charter just to higher grades. And but are there others that you've been in contact with that are trying to change that or make more opportunities for schools like yours in the political realm?
Yeah. So, well, what I found is, forget about the politicians,
Mhm.
because they're never going to do anything. Um, you have to just meet the people on the ground. So I do lots of podcasts like I'm doing with you.
Mm-hmm.
I go to Vertex and I say, "Hey, look, have you ever thought about this?" Just tell them the answer. I go around doing that all the time. I go to all these conferences. I make podcasts. I have visitors coming in. So we got 12, 15 visitors coming in every day. They come and look around the school. They take ideas. They go back to their schools. So other people are running their schools with ideas that they've taken from us. So, and it becomes part of the national conversation. Once upon
Mm-hmm.
a time, nobody thought about having silent corridors. Now everybody talks about it. Now, not everybody does it, but it's part of the conversation.
Mhm.
So, yeah, that's a good thing, really. And that's how I'm doing it, because I can't do it through official methods. It's just, we just haven't been allowed. And the thing is, in America, there's really very much this sense of, well, you can just go off and raise some money and you set up your own school. That doesn't happen here. People don't give money to things like that. It's very different. We're
Hmm.
much more a socialist country. So everybody presumes that the state is paying for the educational services. They wouldn't. In America, there's a real sense of, oh, you're doing. I hear of these people all the time on Twitter. I'm setting up this new thing. I'm getting donations like that. It's a very different
Mm-hmm.
mindset in America. You guys are pioneers. You just think in a very different way.
Well, you're
Well,
sending your upper class to Harvard and Yale, so I don't
Yeah.
know. I'm very concerned about this, though. I'm afraid of what we'll be sending back to you. What's thoughts on that?
Yes. Oh, I see what you mean. Yes, they'll all come back. These wokeified. Yeah. Yeah. It's true. It's true.
Fire,
well,
caveat emptor.
I just wanted to ask if we could squeeze in one more question. I know you must be
Yeah.
busy, but I want to ask, where do you find your teachers and how do you train them to do things in the Michaela way?
Yeah. Well, I mean, in this country, every school can advertise. I think it's the same with your charter schools, but that's the case with all of our schools. You advertise, people apply directly to the school, and then you can hire them. So anybody who applies here, it's sort of self-selecting,
Okay.
really, because they're interested in what we do. It can be difficult to find teachers, mind you, who buy into what we do. I'm always very clear with people. When you come for interview, you're not just figuring out whether we want you; it's about whether you want us.
Mm-hmm.
And so then when people come, they have tons and tons of training. It can be quite hard because they're having to change their habits and do things very differently. I always say you go underwater for 6 weeks, but then you come and your head is up above the water. And in another 6 weeks, you'll end up fully, submerged. But, or not submerged, you'll emerge from it. Anyway, point is, you'll be out of the water. And they manage it, and then they're all, because we started from scratch, of course. We've always been working towards this goal and always altering things and changing things to make it a little bit better. So now we're a real machine about it. Different people come in and observe you, give you feedback, you implement the feedback, somebody else comes in and says, yeah, great, now do this, and so on. And then people just get better and better at becoming a Michaela teacher.
And if you get a clunker that just doesn't learn, what do you do? Do you can you give them the boot, or do
Yeah.
they?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, but I have to say, I don't ever really give people the boot. People just tend to leave if that's the
Mm.
case. I'm always very kind. I always will pay them an extra month's salary or something, so they have something to make sure that they're all right. The thing is, once they've taught here, if they leave here, every other school is going to grab them. So um,
Oh wow.
they'll easily find another job in a minute, really.
So
Uh,
the same people that are tearing you down for what you're doing are snatching up your former
yeah.
teachers. I love the irony.
Yes, that's exactly right. It's hilarious, isn't it? Yeah.
Thank you so much, Bonnie. Do you have any final thoughts?
Uh, I'm glad you're doing what you're doing. Thank you. Keep it up. I think you should write a book if you haven't already called Just Tell Them the Answer.
Okay, I'll think about
and
that.
and teacher training modules for us or for teachers all over the world. I think that would be
Oh,
terrific, just to break the spell
Yeah.
of all of this craziness.
yes, yes.
It's been a pleasure,
As always.
Catherine. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you for having me.